design, breaking down motion design from other creators and approaching them, because in this line of industry you will have to work with a lot of references. You get, like I showed you, someone can, most of the time a client will want you to have a specific skill, a specific vibe for a project, or look and feel for a project. And most of the time these are going to be reference videos. So having the mind or an understanding of motion design fundamentals and basic will always help you approach. Like in all my time of the industry, let's say 70 to 80% of the project I get are always new projects. Or when I mean new, like something I've not explored before, or I don't have a a reference video for, but then I just know that okay, this stuff is approachable, or I can actually do it. Today it may be from someone from the food industry. They will send me a food motion design or references. Tomorrow it could be crypto. Next tomorrow it could be real estate. But then if you shouldn't be bothered. Oh, I've not done something like this before, so doesn't it mean that I cannot approach it? Once they send a reference video, you just need to analyze it and break everything down into pieces, and okay, then so that you can be able to animate it. And that was what we did last week. How many of you were able to attempt the assignment since then? Okay, good luck, Sage. Can you share your work, please? Let's see what you did. Good news. Yeah. Could you share with us? Could you share again? Please again. Okay, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Exactly how we did it in the class. So if anybody can do a video as this, you can basically replicate any other motion design. You can always multiply. I think the next thing is just, most of them can just have a bit technical morphing, but then once you have this approach, the rest, anything more technical, you can just use the internet, YouTube, to ask some specific um tutorials for maybe an effect. Maybe for example, now let me say there's an effect for a paper turn, or floating paper, or money flying around. Each understanding how to use search Google search words, search keywords will always help you. And these are just very basic, simple simple techniques that can add to your process. For example, I think on the 14th of February, I wanted to do something for Valentine for MDX, and I had a concept in mind. This what they call it, this time time frame effect, where things will be the frames will be doubling while it's moving, like a freeze frame, where the pictures will be duplicating at behind the character or the object. I just had to look for what it's called, and it was called echo effect. Search for echo effect in After Effects, and it was a very simple effect. It was a very simple effect, and and you can just add it to your motion, and you have beautiful, beautiful original or authentic motion design to your project. Um, so I think that I'm very happy that at least someone can share his work, and it was actually beautiful from my end. Anthony, I think it's time. We have enough people already. You can go on with your class.
Yeah, okay. So for anyone that wasn't here My name is Anthony, and I'm going to be taking UI animation today. So let me know if you can see my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, okay. So with UI animation, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's motion for UI elements, be it like a website or an app. And besides the aesthetics of it, it always elevates design and always makes it look good. The functionality aspect of it is it helps for navigation through a website. So it's not very nice for you to go on a website or an app where you click a button and you're wondering if something is happening. So it's always important to have little tiny micro interactions that will happen, either clicking a button or swiping or whatever, to show that something actually happened. So today I'm going to be doing two animations. The first one is just going to be a loading animation, like the very basic UI animations. It's going to be like a looping loading animation, while the second is going to be like a shopping application where you can, it's basic interactions for simple shopping UI. So at any point while I'm talking, if you're no longer able to see my screen or you can't really hear me, please indicate so I would try and correct that. So since I think everyone can see here, we are going to start. So we're going to start with the loading animation. So create a new composition. We're going to be using like a mobile phone dimension. So 1080 by 1920, 30 frames per second, 10 frames or 10 seconds. So basic stuff. We'll start by right clicking, new, create a solid, white solid, and a new circle. So hold down shift, and so I'm going to be using a bunch of shortcuts like keyframes. So if there's anyone you miss, so what I did now basically was I just held down. So the anchor point was somewhere here. So I just basically held down Control and double clicked on the pan behind to snap the anchor points to the center of the objects, scale it down a little, and align it to the center of the composition. So this is our first circle. And now we can duplicate that, move it to the side, that again. Move it to the side. So we have the three circles that we need for the animation. So I think we have like a palette we can use for this. Select the three. Please, if you have questions while I'm demonstrating this, don't hesitate to ask me so I can go back and clarify you on anything. So if you go back to the reference, the first motion would be the circle, sort of like going up and over to the other side. So this animation is like a looping animation where first frame is exactly the same as the last frame, so it's always repeating. So if we are going to do it in such a way that it's exactly that, and we don't have to duplicate keyframes. So once we get the first basic movement, and the composition repeats, it's going to just keep looping. So for the first circle at this end, which is circle 2, we can display the position animations, and I display the position animations by just clicking on the layer and pressing P to show the X and the Y and the X positions. And we want it to go from here over to this, to the position of the last circle, which is our circle 3. So we add, let's say we go 10 frames in front, add a, and okay, what I just did now, to move 10 frames in front, you hold Shift Control, and let's say you're going to the right, Shift Control right arrow, you can jump 10 frames in front. And if you want to jump 10 frames backwards, you hold Shift, Control Shift, so Control Shift to the right, 10 frames in front, Control Shift to the left, 10 frames behind. So we can add a keyframe animation, and going, let's say 20 frames. So for this particular one, we can easily just move this, try to eyeball it and match it to the position of the circle. But the easiest way you can do this is to display the position look of the last circle. That's like just clicking on the layer, pressing P, and copying, click Control C, copying the X location of this last circle and pasting it in the X location of the other circle. So if you move, you see the circle moves to the exact location. So it's important to do this for looping animations, because you would want the last frame to be the exact same with the first frame in order to avoid like jumps. So if the last frame isn't exactly the same, you notice very obvious jumps from that particular frame when the composition repeats. So it's important to be as accurate as possible while doing animations that are going to be looping. So we've done this, and the animation is supposed to go from this point to this point, but it's supposed to go in such a way where it jumps over the entire thing. So we can easily ease this animation. So right click, select all the keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, or F9 on the keyboard. So we have Bezier curves on the position keyframe. So we can easily just drag these up to make that particular curve that we are trying to get, and that helps us to get the jump effect that we were looking for initially. So we've kind of done the first part of the animation where it jumps over to the next one. We can also get some nice effects on the animation by going to graph editor, and let's say we move this to the right a little, so it starts off fast and slows down at the end. So as it's like this, it starts off slow, gets fast towards the middle, and ends slow. So if we drag this to the left slightly, it will start off really fast and end slow. Everyone is still with me. I'm not too fast, am I? Can everyone still hear me? If I ask questions, please respond, so I'll know that I'm going to everyone is hearing me.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Everyone
okay.
can hear you, sir.
All right, good. So we've done the first part of the animation. So there's something I sort of like to do when I'm doing this type of animations. It's not necessary, but it's something that I just prefer. So it helps me differentiate certain elements of the animation visually. So because all the elements on screen are exactly the same color. So I might not know which one is, because when this one goes over this, I'll probably not know which one is which. So I'll just add this fill effect. So effects, and go to effects and presets and type fill, and select the layer and double click. So it turns to red. So I can easily turn off the effect and turn it back on anytime I want. So I'm able to differentiate the layers. So the next part of the animation, when this particular part jumps over, the two other circles move to the left and the animation repeats. So we can do that. The way we can do that is to parent the last circle. We can parent the last circle to the first circle and just animate the first circle, because we can easily add position keyframes on these two circles and try to animate them individually. But an easy way to do it is to just select the last circle, parent it to the first one by using the pick whip. So you select the pick whip and drag it to the circle one and just animate the first circle. So we can add a keyframe on the first circle and then copy the position, because we are trying to get to the first circle to go to the position of the second circle, which is the circle that is jumping over. So we can copy the keyframe of the second circle. This is like to my point of trying to make everything as accurate as possible. Anywhere you can make it as accurate as possible, you try to do it. And if it's not possible, there are other ways you can also try to make it as accurate as possible besides eyeballing it, because for the most part, eyeballing it might not necessarily work. There could be some very little jitters, but where you can make it as accurate as possible, you should. So we jump to the next keyframe. So we are doing 20 frames in between, and I'm using Control Shift right arrow to jump 10 frames. And to jump between keyframes, so let's say I'm at the beginning of the composition, I can use K. You just hit K on your keyboard to jump to the next keyframe instead of dragging dragging this playhead across the timeline. I could easily, wherever I am on the timeline, I could easily press K to jump to the keyframe in front of me, or press J to jump to the keyframe on the left. So J moves you to the keyframe on the left, and K moves you to the keyframe on the right. So once I get to the keyframe on the right, I can just paste the position of the position of the circle 2 to the circle 1, and it kind of like, it now follows the animation, so it moves. So you can see that it's sort of like cutting into the circle that is jumping, because it's not the same keyframe interpolation. So this is a Bezier and this is linear. So we can also hit F9 or right click keyframe assistant, easy ease, go into the graph editor and pull this slightly to the right, so it starts off fast and ends slow. So if we play this animation, we can see that we've completed the first part of the loading animation. So we can go back to this and turn off the fill effect that I added when we've done that. We can go to the last keyframe and hit N to trim our composition, to cut the composition to this particular point. So if I play this now, we see that the animation is looping, and we just have how many keyframes? 4 keyframes on this particular composition to make this looping animation. Another thing we can do to cut out this excess part of the animation. So the animation is way too long for the composition, is way too long for the animation we needed to do. So we can cover over this particular part of our timeline, right click and trim come to work area. So we can easily, that's an easy way to trim your composition to the specific size you want it to be when you're on animating. So if you're not sure about how long you think your composition will be and you make it super long, you can easily also trim it down as soon as you're done to cut out the excess space. So we're done with this particular animation. Does anybody have any questions for this particular one, or do we move on to the next part? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so I don't think anybody has any questions. So we're going to move on to this particular animation. So there are a couple of things happening here. So we are going to be doing this swipe animation, the switching of the text here. So as the items swipe across the screen, the text here changes. We'll be doing that. And also this particular interaction where it goes from add to cart to a loading animation and then to done, indicating that it has been added to the cart. So I don't know if anyone is interested. I'm using the tilde key above tab on your keyboard to zoom in to my timeline. So if you want to focus on a particular part of the panel on After Effects, you can hover over that particular part and click on tilde to zoom into that part. To go out, you just hit tilde also. If I want to do it to my timeline, hover over my timeline and hit tilde to focus on that particular part of the panel on After Effects. So we can start by importing. So this particular UI is an Illustrator file. So we'll start by importing that particular file into After Effects, importing it as a composition. Okay, so double click. So it's let's assume you got the After Effects, the Illustrator file, and it's not in the exact specifications that you think it should be. So this composition is 750 by 500, and we are using 1080 by 1920. So we can just, you can do this a couple of ways. You can go to composition settings, or you can use the shortcut Control K. So I prefer using the shortcut instead of going all the way to composition settings. So to get the composition settings as quickly as possible, just hit Control K, change this to 1080, hit tab to go to the next one, 1920, 30 frames per second. Okay. So we've increased the size of the composition, but we have not also scaled up the items on the composition. We can easily do that. The way I like to do that, we can easily select all this, hit scale, and try to scale everything up. Most times when the to scale multiple items up on After Effects, I'd like to use a null object. So we can select new null objects and select everything. So if you select the first one, you can go down to the last one, hold shift, select that to select everything, hold the pick whip and drag it over to the null object, and everything that has been selected would now be a parent of the null object. Null object start scales up from the center of the composition. So that's like an easy way to scale up multiple items in a composition in After Effects. So when I scale this up, you'd notice that it becomes a bit blurry. This can most times it it's not going to be able to you're not able to do anything about it if these are images, but they are not images, they are vector files, they are from Illustrator. So the vector files cannot get pixelated, and an easy way to fix this in After Effects is to select this button. So collapse transformations, this particular button that looks like a star. So from composition layer, collapse transformations for vector layer, continuously rasterize. So if I select all this for all the layers, they all become sharper. So I can also easily use the null object to move, not just scale, to also adjust location, adjust position, adjust the scale on multiple items in a composition. So if you're happy with the way everything is in the composition, you can keep the null object, or you can just delete it. In this case, we don't really need it anymore, so we can delete that. We can start by adding a new solid white background to serve as the background, and drag it to the bottom of the composition. So we can use this to serve as the background of the UI. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but if you select each item on this composition, they are a bit too large. So it depends on you really. When I scale, let's say I scale the shoe down, it doesn't necessarily scale down from the center. When I adjust it, you can fix it by using the span behind tool and try to eyeball it and place the anchor point at the center of the item. You can, that's an option, but another option is to right click, create, and create shapes from layers. So you can easily carry in your Illustrator files into After Effects. You can convert the Illustrator shapes into native After Effects shapes, and doing that, you can just hold Control and double click on the pan behind to snap the anchor point to the center of the composition, and we have a new item, a new layer for the shoes. So we can also do that for the top. Right click, create shapes from layer. We can do that for this. Hold Control, double click to snap the anchor point to the center. We can also do that for the joggers. Create and hold Control and double click. So this, and okay, and now if let's go back to the reference. So we can see that as the animation starts, the particular item that is on display right now, so to kind of indicate that this is the item that we are looking at, it's a bit bigger than the rest of the other items, and it's in, so like the opacity is turned up to 100, unlike the other ones that are to the side. So as soon as it goes to the side, it scales down. The one coming into the middle scales up, and the opacity also goes down for the one that is going off screen. So we're going to be animating two things: the position and the opacity of the items. So we've gotten the outlines for the joggers, the top, and the shoe. So we can move those up. Select the shoe, scale it up a bit to sort of indicate that it's at the center of the screen. You can select these two and move them to the side a little, not so much off screen. So if you have any questions as to what I've done while up until this point, you can also tell me. So You can go 10 frames in front, select the shoe layer. So we are going to be animating the scale, the opacity, and the position. So you can start with the position. So for the position, for this type of animations, I think for me, it's best to use a null object so you can animate the position at the same time. So most of the time, if you try to animate the position individually, you might not get the, especially when you're going to be going into the graph editor, you might not get the exact same movement on each layer. So using a null object to move all of them like an assembly line at the same time is for me going to be like the best option, because you have control over the movement of the, for this example, there are 3 items. So you have what's it called? You have control over the movements of that. So we can right click new null objects, select these 3 and equip it to the null. So we can add the keyframe for the position, select the layer, hit P position, move 20 frames in front. So Control Shift, right click once, 10 frames, and right click twice, 20 frames, and move towards the right until the top comes into frame. So we've succeeded in making the position animation. So if subsequently we also want the next item to also come into screen, so you can jump 10 frames in front and also move that. So we don't have to have position keyframes on each item individually to be able to make this particular movement. We just need to have an opacity and a scale on each of them and leave the position animation up to the null object to control. So we can jump back to this keyframe. So from the reference, you can see that as this shoe goes off screen, it drops in opacity, and the one that is coming on screen goes from like 50% opacity to 100% opacity. So you can select the shoe and hit T for opacity. So T is for opacity, S is for scale, P is for position. We need 2 particular parameters for this particular animation. We need the opacity and we need the scale. So we can, if we hit T for the opacity, to select hit T to display the opacity, and we also need S. But when we hit S, select the scale to display the scale, the opacity goes out. So a way to show the two both the scale and the opacity is to hold Shift and T. So if I hold Shift T or Shift S, either way we can select. If I hold Shift P, we can display those three the parameters. So C for opacity and Shift S for scale, and add keyframes on those. So we can jump to the next keyframe and scale this down. We can easily select one of these S, copy the scale keyframe and paste it here. So we know it's precisely the same size as the other UI elements, and also drop the opacity to like 50%. Okay. So So the next thing would be to do the top. So as the top comes into frame, it should scale up just like this was scaled up when it was at the center of the screen. As it moves to the side, it scale down, and the top should as well scale up. So we need a scale animation and an opacity animation. So the top should start off at 50% animation because it's at the side. We add a keyframe for that, add a keyframe for the scale, and we can also copy the scale of this particular one, issue element, move, hit K to jump to the next keyframe, increase the opacity to 100, and paste the value of the scale, is the value of the scale. So we've done the first part of this animation. So also the last element, which is like the jogger, should also be at 50% animation. And if we are going to animate it to also come into the center of the screen, we would also need to animate the scale and the opacity as it moves to the center of the screen. So if we play the animation, it's linear, so it's the speed is the same from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation, and it's not very typical for you to always use linear keyframes in certain animations. So if you want to add a bit of like unique movements to your animations, you should always use an easy ease keyframe. So either F9 on your keyboard, or right click keyframe assistant, easy ease. You can go to the graph editor. You can hold, okay, so to zoom in to your composition, you can go to this particular part of your keyboard and drag this thing out to zoom into your timeline of your composition. Or an easy way you can do it is, if you're using a mouse, you can hold Alt and scroll on your mouse wheel to zoom into the animation. So the keyframe interpolation, I'll just go with the uniform animation, the interpolation we've been using. So we want to start off fast and slow down towards the end. So, and you can also always select all keyframes in your timeline and go into the graph editor. You don't have to select one, do the same thing. You can always select everything and go into your graph editor to animate, to adjust the keyframe handles. So if you play the animation, so you can see it's a lot better from this, where the movement is the same throughout, to easing the keyframe, going into the graph editor and dragging this out for it to look like this. So in my opinion, the movement is a lot better. So the next thing we need to do, so as the shoe changes, this particular part of the UI element should also change. So it's no longer going to be displaying the shoe. It's now going to be displaying this red top. So for this particular part of the animation is this text. So if I turn off the visibility and turn on, you can see it's a text. So we can easily do this. So far as we know, like the fonts of the text, we can do this by selecting the text tool, or Control T on your keyboard to select. I think you just need to hit Control T to select the text tool. So this particular font is Montserrat Extra Bold. We can click on this and type in red. Okay, yeah, we need to create this first. should change the fonts. Extra code. Select the color. So we just need to match this particular element as closely as we can to the reference. So we can also use that particular method I said in the beginning while I was doing the loading screen animation, where you can select the layer, type fill on effects and presets, double click, and just turn it red, so you can easily differentiate the two colors. And when you want to turn it off, you just hit the FX sign on the effects and presets panel to turn off that particular effect. Well, this is just to help us differentiate one layer from the other while we're trying to match up reference, because while doing animations, for the most part, you most likely need to recreate certain elements from, let's say you get assets from Illustrator or Figma, you are going to run into a situation where you need to recreate certain things, and you want them to line up perfectly with, or almost perfectly with, the reference you have. So we can select the pan behind. So the shortcut for the pan behind tool is Y. So if you hit Y on your keyboard, you select the pan behind tool, and you can hold Control to snap it to any of the corners. So if I snap it to any of the corners and drag towards any part of this box, I can snap to any corner. So I can snap it to this corner, line it up, and scale down. So if you want to if you want to scale down slowly, if you want to generally do anything slowly in After Effects, you hold Control and move it as slow as you can until you get something you like. I can turn off this particular effect and also turn off the original layer, because we no longer need it since we've recreated this particular element. So what we would be doing would be like to animate a transition effect from Dior shoes to red top. So if we duplicate this and move it down, can change this to red top. Hold Control, double click on pan behind to put keyframes at the center, and we can parent the red top to the Dior shoes. So anything like a scale animation or a position animation, when done to the Dior shoes, will also affect the red top. So can go to where the animation starts at the 10th frame, select the red shoe, hit P on your keyboard to display position, add a keyframe on position, go to the next keyframe and drag it up. So I'm trying to do an animation where it slides up and the opacity drops to 0. So we would need to add the opacity keyframe to both the red shoe and the red top and the Dior shoes. So I don't know if anyone is wondering, I'm switching between the selection tool by hitting V, and the pan behind tool, I've said it's Y. So anytime I switch to the selection tool, I don't need to go up here to select it. I can just hit V on my keyboard to select it. So you can hit these two layers, hit C on our keyboard to select the opacity, to display the opacity. Jump to the keyframe on the left by pressing J and add 2 keyframes. So the Dior shoe at this point should be in display. So the opacity should be at 100, while the red top should be at 50. So if you just select the red top and drop, sorry, not 50, 0. If you select the red top to be at 0, we can jump to the next keyframe by hitting K and drop the Dior shoes to 0 and increase the opacity of the red top to be 1, and select all the keyframes, F9, easy ease. So on your computer, if you don't want to, if F9 doesn't work, it probably just means that you need to hold function F9 to be able to use to change the interpolation to easy ease. So if you hit F9 and it doesn't work, you just need to hold function and F9 for it to work. So you can go into our graph editor, select the 2 keyframes and move it slightly to the right, just like we've done with the rest of the animations. So by the time we play the animation, so I think it's a bit slow. It's a bit slow. Let's see. So to display all the keyframes for what we've done, we can select the 2 layers. So if you select these 2 layers, we hit U on the keyboard on the keyboard. So to display all keyframes that you've added to a particular layer, you just need to select it and hit U. So we've not done anything to this linear keyframe. That's why I think it looks off. So if you play the animation, you notice it looks off. The position and the opacity are not really lining up. So if you want to make it uniform, you can just select everything again, hit F9 to easy ease, and give everything the same interpolation. So when we play it now, it lines up. So that is that part of the animation done. Does anyone have any questions to what we've done so far? Okay, so no question. So at this point now, let's imagine someone is shopping on this particular app and has swiped to the red top and they probably want to buy it for themselves or for their girlfriends. They are going to most likely add to carts. So we're going to be doing this particular interaction where when you hit add to cart, it sort of loads for a few seconds, assuming it loads, and when it's done loading and adds to cart, it's done. So there are 2 things. So one good thing about After Effects is you can always analyze what someone else has done. So if you like a particular interaction or you've seen something somewhere that you really like and you download the video or the GIF and put it into After Effects, you can watch things frame by frame to know exactly what was done to make that particular animation possible. So as you can see, it's a simple color change animation and a swipe up animation. So the loading animation goes from the bottom to the top, while the add to cart also fits out. And as soon as this is done for the done animation, the same thing, the loading bar goes from the middle to the top and disappears, while the done goes from the bottom to the middle of the box of the bottom, and the color also changes from dark purple to green. So that would be the interaction we would be doing now. So I don't know, no one has any questions, so I'll just carry on. So we can, let's say the person does this, and it's not going to be instantly, that you kind of need to take a few seconds to move your fingers to the add to cart button. Let's say you're scrolling through this thing on your phone. So let's say we give like 10 frames, or okay, let's say 10 frames for the person to click on add to cart. So we can go, yeah. So it's also important to, while importing Illustrator files. So if I go to my Illustrator file, I separated each thing into its own layer and named them. So when I bring it into After Effects, it's very easy for me to identify those elements. So I think it should be this one. This one. So the same thing we need to do, would need to recreate the add to cart button. So the text, and if we right click, create shapes from vector layer, we create this particular shape, and we have a new layer that has been added. So the cart button outline, if you turn it off and bring this one back, so we can use this to recreate the add to cart. So add to and the font for this is Montserrat semi-bold. You can go change that, and it's already a different color, so we don't necessarily need to do the whole fill to be able to differentiate it. So we can select your pan behind to hold control and snap it to one of the edges, align it, and it's S. Select the layer, it's S to scale it down until we are happy with how well it's aligned. So you might not necessarily get it, so because like the kerning could be different, so we probably might not be able to get it perfectly, and always adjust it on the character panel to something that we're happy with. Change the color to white, and now we can hide the bottom. Yeah, so we've separated the text on the button from the actual button itself, so we can animate those two individually. So the first thing we would need to do would be to find a way to animate the colors, the color of the button. So it's going to go from this color, like this teal looking color, to maybe dark purple. So we can animate a color change using the fill effect. So you can select the layer, double click on the fill. It will obviously start off with this particular color. So we can hide this fill, hold the eyedropper to and select the color, and turn on the fill for it to have this color. Add the keyframe on the on the color change and go back to this timeline and hit hue to display the keyframe. So you can go, let's say 15 frames in front. So you can control shift, then control shift right arrow to move 10 frames, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and to move 5 frames, and add another keyframe. We can, I think I have a palette here. Drag this palette into the screen and use that to change the color. So we can go from this orange, or not orange, sorry, red, to this dark purple. So can animate the color change that way. Add change the keyframes from linear to easy ease, and we are able to animate the color change that way. So while the color is changing, the add to cart also needs to go from the top to from the middle of the button to the top and fade out, and it's going to fade also with the into the loading screen. So we can easily duplicate. So you can change the composition name to loading. This is our main loading composition. So we can come here and duplicate it. So we can come to our project window, project panel, duplicate that particular layer. The reason why I'm duplicating it, because if I don't, and let's say I want to reuse this particular composition, and I drag that composition into this, the composition already comes with a white background, which would block out most of the elements that we're using. And if I come here to turn it off, it turns off here and it comes up and it's off here, but we need the white background to be on in our main composition. So it's just easier to duplicate the composition and use it as a sort of like a fresh composition. So if we double click to go into this composition, we can turn off the white background here, and it's still on in our main composition, but this particular one we are trying to reuse, it's on. So we can drag this composition into this composition and line it up. So line it up as much as we can, scale it down. Okay. So we so like the problem we have now is that this composition is not exactly long enough for the animation we are trying to do now. And even if we try to drag it over to this point where it's supposed to show and we move down, at some point when the animation runs its course, it disappears and cuts off. So we need the animation to be able to run for as long as we want. So a good way to do that is to loop a composition. So in this particular animation we did, we looped the composition by making the composition as short as we want and made the last frame exactly the same with the first frame. But in a situation where we are trying to reuse a particular, so to sort of like work faster, you always need to try to reuse things that you've already animated, not necessarily animating things from the top already. So a good way to loop your compositions would be to right click, time, enable time remapping. So if when we enable time remapping, we are now able to extend this composition down to almost infinity, but we are not still able to, it's not also able to loop. So to make it loop, you hover over this stopwatch, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch. When you click on stopwatch, you click on the expressions language menu, this play button icon here. Click on it, go to property and go to loop out. Type is equal to open quotation cycle, comma, non keyframes equal to 0, close bracket. So when you click on that and click out of the expressions menu, we are now able to drag this composition out to as long as we want, and the animation loops on for forever until we either cut the layer or fade it out where we no longer need it. But this is a very good way to loop composition. So in a situation where you have something you've created and you need it either to run continuously non-stop, or you need to reuse it and it's not, as the composition isn't as long as you want it to be, and you need it to continue running up until a certain point or before you cut it. It's a good way to loop animations. So we can we find the point where it fades up. So as it goes from this color to dark purple, we need the cat icon to go from the top to the bottom. Since it's the cat icon that is moving, we can also parent the loading animation to the cat layer. So we carry the pick whip, drag it to the cat icon. So when moving the cat layer, the loading icon also moves. So we are going to animate two things: the position, so hit P to display position, and Shift T to also display the opacity at the same time. Add your keyframes, hit K to jump to the next keyframe and drag this up. You can drag it up until this particular loading animation comes to the center and fade this out. Select your two keyframes, easy is. Then you can also, if you don't want the opacity to go off, the opacity and the final position keyframe to meet at the same point, you can drag the opacity keyframe inward, so the text or the layer completely fades out before it gets to its final location. So if I play the animation, okay, so another thing where, because we're already done with this particular part of the animation where it goes from the Dior shoes to the red top. So in an event where you're doing animations like this and you're done with a particular part of the animation, and when you want to preview your animations, you don't want it to start from the beginning, you just want to preview a certain part of the animation. You go to a particular part of the composition where you want to start and hit D on your keyboard to cut the beginning of the composition to that point. And also, let's say you want the animation to stop here, hit N to close it out at that particular point. So if I play the animation, it starts where in the animation I'm currently working on, instead of starting from the very beginning of the composition. So it's an easy way to quickly preview certain parts of the animation you're currently working on. So if I play the animation, we can also go into the graph editor and drag. I'm increasing the size of the timeline by holding Alt and scrolling on my mouse, so you can drag this inwards to give it a nicer movement. So when this happens, we can wait for, let it run for a few seconds, and then now the next part would be to animate this part of the animation where it goes from the loading animation to done. So we can go back to the button, add another keyframe for this particular part. So we don't just go from here to let's say green. It's these two keyframes that are in between where nothing particularly is happening besides the loading animation working would are supposed to be the exact same keyframe. So we go there and let's say jump 10 frames or 15 frames in front and change the color from dark purple to green. And for that, we also need the loading animation to go up and fade out also. So we display position and opacity. And the next thing that's supposed to come below it should be the done animation. So instead of trying to type out done and scaling it down again, we can duplicate the add to cart, press hue, maybe go to the top of the animation, and to delete all the keyframes you can select this hit delete, or you can just hit the two stopwatch icons to remove all the animations on that particular layer. Double click, change this to done, hold control, double click on the pan behind to snap the layer, to snap the anchor point to the center, drag the X position to move it to roughly the center of the button. So we're going from add to cart to the loading icon, and from the loading icon we would go to done. So since the loading icon is also going to move up, we can parent the done button So drag the pick wick and move to the loading icon. So when the loading icon moves, it also moves the position of the done layer also. So we can just add keyframes on the loading animation instead of adding keyframes on the loading and on the done layer also. So add the keyframe on the position of the loading, jump to the next keyframe by hitting K and drag it up. When you do that, to go back, add a keyframe for opacity, jump to the last keyframe and add it and fade it out. Select the two keyframes, and yeah, we also need to add the opacity on the done. So the done should start from an opacity of 0. To an opacity of 100. So we can select all these keyframes. Easy is going to the graph editor and drag this out a little to the left. So when we preview the animation, it goes from add to cart, the loading animation, and then to done. So we can, at this point, we can preview our entire animation. Play, it goes from this to this. and to done. So also the last thing, since I think we still have enough time, so we can also go from the red top to the jogger panel. So go from this particular one to this last one, also change, basically do the same thing we have here and go from done back to add to cart. So I don't know, at this point, does anyone have any questions from what I have done so far? Are there any questions? Yeah, okay. So I think we can continue. Okay, so I think, let's say we jump 10 frames in front or 20 frames in front and start the next part of the animation. So if you can remember, we are using a position, a null, to animate the position of the slides. So we use the null to animate the position of the shoes to the red top, and we also do the same thing to the jogger. So if we add another keyframe, jump 20 frames in front, Control Shifts right arrow key, and move this roughly to the center. Also need to animate the opacity. So add a keyframe also for the opacity. Jump to this, increase the opacity to 100, and also scale. So Shift S to also display the scale. If we add a keyframe for the scale and this, and scale it up. So I think we can again try to make everything as aligned and accurate as possible. So we can copy the scale value for this last one, go over to the last keyframe and paste that particular value, so everything is in and around the same size. And also for this particular red top, it also needs to scale down. So we can add a new keyframe for this, go over to the last keyframe, and instead of maybe trying to go to find the value for it to scale down, we can, because it went from also being small to getting big. So we can select this keyframe, Control C, copy, and Control V, paste it at our playhead for it to also scale down. So that's like a good way. If you know that you've already done a particular animation previously and you have a keyframe for it, you can easily copy paste that particular keyframe to another location on the timeline. So instead of trying to also dial in those values again, you can just copy paste keyframes. So the opacity also needs to go from 100 to 50. So copy paste that same keyframe. We change these keyframes to easy ease and adjust the interpolation. So we can preview the animation. Maybe go put somewhere roughly around here, hit B for our animation to start at this point, play it, and we're able to go from the red top to the joggers. And we also need to change this particular parts of the UI. So also there, as you can see, like the whole time, the timeline is kind of getting occupied with elements, and certain things are, they are kind of like not the same color. So you can, if you notice that your timeline is getting clogged up with a lot of layers and you're trying to organize certain things, so we can still see that we have items that are still Illustrator layers. So if we want to easily identify Illustrator layers from the rest of the layers, we can go over to this color part, click on the color, and let's say we want all Illustrator layers to be dark green. We label all Illustrator layers to be dark green. So when we open our timeline subsequently, maybe tomorrow, you're not really confused on what is what. You already know that certain things are this particular color. So we have all the text to be a red color on the layer. We have the this particular elements for the top, the and the joggers, and the red top to be, let's say, to be a purple layer. So this is like also an easy way, besides labeling your layers, it's also an easy way to have a particular color assigned to specific elements that are similar. So we can select the red top, duplicate it, change it to joggers, hit U, because since we duplicated it, it's going to have the same keyframes. We duplicated it from the red top, so it's going to have the same keyframes with the keyframes on the red top, and we are going to need to remove those keyframes, because adding new keyframes would mess up the adding new keyframes without removing the previous keyframes or adjusting the previous keyframes that were there previously would mess up the entire animation. So to display all the keyframes, you select the layer and hit U on your keyboard. So we can do so one of two things. We can select these keyframes and drag them out, or we can just delete them and add fresh keyframes to that particular point where our playhead is. So we need to adjust the position first of all and drag it down to this particular point. And since it's going to be moving up, we don't need to add it's going to moving up at the same time with the red top. We also don't need to add keyframes on the two elements. We can easily parent this to the red top. So anything that happens to the red top also happens to the joggers in terms of like position and scale. So it's going to be switching from red top to the joggers. We select add the position keyframe for the red top, jump to the next keyframe, hitting K, drag the position up, and also add an opacity keyframe for it to also fade out. So add the keyframe here and change the opacity to 0 for it to fade out. The same thing with the opacity for the joggers. It will start off at 0. So add a keyframe for 0, go to the last keyframe and add a keyframe for 100. Select the two linear keyframes, F9 to easy ease, go into the graph editor and drag it out. Okay, so we can preview the animation. Also, another thing you might need to know. So I don't know the depending on the size of the animation or the intensity of the animation that you're doing, how many layers, how many effects you've added on top. This is like pretty simple. So most computers will be able to handle it. So you can easily drop the quality of the preview. So when you want to preview, you can drop the quality. It becomes a little pixelated, but it loads faster. So you're able to preview your animations a lot quicker to sort of like have a general idea of how things are moving. So it looks a lot faster, but this is depending on how intense what you're doing is. So we've gone from the red top to the joggers, and we'll also need to switch the done back to add to cart, because at this point we haven't added the jogger animation to to the cards for the UI. So when it switches from the red to the joggers, we'll go back to the point where they're changing the color of this particular button. So we add the keyframe for green, go 20 frames in front, and copy paste the orange keyframe. So you can easily see for this particular effect, it displays how it transitions from one particular part to another. There are a lot of other ways you can use masks to animate this particular thing. You can use these field effects. So since we're using the field effects, you can easily see what colors are changing from what to what. So you can copy, Control C, Control V, this keyframe back to done. So we already have an add to cart button here already. We can duplicate it by Control D, or we could, instead of duplicating it, we could split the layer. So you can do that by you can do that by selecting the layer and Control Shift D to duplicate. So Control D is to duplicate the layer, while Control Shift D is to split the layer at a particular playhead. So you can do that, drag that down, select the layers and remove all the keyframes from it previously, and drag it down to bring the opacity also, and drag it down to, okay, I think we split it at the wrong points. To do a check, focus on over, drag it in. If anyone has any questions up until this point, please ask while I continue. So we can add a keyframe for position here. The reason why I'm sort of doing this is to ensure that there are situations where you might not really be sure if you use let's say you parent one to the other, just the way we've been doing. So the reason why I'm doing this now is to put the position in the exact same spot as the first add to cart that we were using. So even when, let's say, I swipe back to the very first item on the shopping list, the shoes, the add to cart is in the exact same spot. So you can try to be consistent with this sort of things while you're doing this animation. So from here we go to this. The done would obviously go move the position. So you can display position keyframes, add the keyframe here, move 20 frames ahead, and drag the position up, and also animate the opacity for it to go from 100 to 0. So the same thing for add to cart, it go from this particular point, and at this point we can go back to the very first keyframe, position keyframe, copy this keyframe, go to this point on our playhead, and select the layer, because they are not two different layers. So this is the first add to cart and the second add to cart. So you can copy this particular keyframe and paste it here. So it's in the exact same point. Select these two layers and ease them. Also animate the opacity on this from 0 to 100. Easy is this too. So you can select this layer, select this layer also, go to the graph editor, zoom in, and drag this out. Okay, so we can preview the animation now. So we go from the red top and back to the joggers, and the add cart button also changes to what it was previously. So we can drag this thing out, play the entire animation from the beginning. Okay. So I think we're done. If anyone has any questions, you're free to ask them. Is there something I did that you weren't really clear on? So are there any questions? Okay, so no one has any questions. All right, so okay, I would be sharing the Illustrator file. So I've already gone and separated for the shopping UI. I'll share the Illustrator files to you guys to try out this particular animation as an assignment to go from to basically do the same thing we've just done here, and also the loading screen animation. So the loading screen animation doesn't have any Illustrator file. They're all native After Effects shapes that were created and animated. So we don't have any Illustrator file to share with that. But for the UI, the shopping UI, I will be sharing the Illustrator file for you to basically do the exact same animation. So the UI, it's basically like the same thing, but if you have your own colors that you'd want to add, or sort of like you want to change the position of certain things, you are free to do that. But generally, if you also still want to stick with exactly the same thing I've just done, you're also free to do that. So I think I am done for today. Since no one has any questions, thank you very much for listening to me for this long. Yeah, so have a nice day, everybody. I don't know if any Astonish if is still around, or if anyone has anything they want to say. Other than that, I think I'll be going now. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.